mute, and that is intentional. We've done that on purpose. There's a lot of us on the call, so we just want to make sure that we are not all talking at once. You are more than welcome to ask questions at any time throughout the training today. All you need to do is click on the GoToMeeting menu bar, look for that tab labeled questions, click on the plus sign, type in anything and everything that you've got. Whether it's a question or a testimonial, or you really just want to add your 2 cents, please, we encourage participation throughout the trainings. I will also be live tweeting today's session, so if it's easier for you to ask questions or make comments via Twitter, definitely would encourage you to do so. You can see our call signs there on the screen. You can follow myself and Jennifer for all the latest in nonprofit education and training. And you can always look for our chat streams just using the hashtag VMLearn. You can see that there on your screen as well. Finally, I know a lot of you are going to have this question, and I save it for the last item before we jump into it. Regarding slides, you don't have to do anything to get the slides. What we do is we use the slide share here at Volunteer Match, and we're going to send a follow-up email after today's session with a link to these slides on our SlideShare account. So don't do anything except look in your inbox for a follow-up meeting or a follow-up email from GoToMeeting. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to pass things over to Jennifer, and we're going to go ahead and get started. So take it away, Jennifer.
Great, thanks, Matt. Good morning, everyone. Before we jump into the content, I wanted to just set the stage today. Many of you may be familiar with Volunteer Match. We are a nonprofit, and we run a website where you can post all of your open volunteer opportunities. If you haven't been on Volunteer Match in the last couple of days, we've got a new look and feel. We'd encourage you to go on there and check it out. And actually, in the next couple of weeks, we'll be doing some webinars specifically on using the new site and the new format to find those volunteers that you need, particularly those volunteers that come with their skills and experience, which we're going to be talking about a lot today. So keep that in mind, and we'll get that information up on the Learning Center in the next couple of days. You can see our mission statement up there at the top, that we strengthen communities by making it easier for good people and good causes to connect. You can also see some of those numbers, just over 93,000 nonprofits. We use that term pretty loosely. It's really all tax-exempt organizations, schools, hospitals, hospices, and faith-based organizations, as well as those 501c3s. About 75,000 active opportunities. That's a moving number. We do have sort of peaks at the beginning of the summer, and then as we go into the school year, that number will go back up. And we've had just over 7 million referrals, and that's a connection between a good person and a good cause since we launched the website in 1998. We've been around for a long time, particularly in the web world. We are still that top-ranked website for online recruitment. About half of the volunteers find us by doing a search on a browser with the word volunteer in it, and finding a volunteer opportunity that way. The other, about slightly less than half, between 42 and 45% of those connections come from our employee volunteer networks. And that's another thing to keep in mind today as we talk about skills-based volunteering. We work with over 160 corporations, mostly Fortune 500 companies, to help them engage their employees, their consumers, or in some cases both, in volunteer activities in the community. So keep that in mind as well. There may be some highly skilled volunteers out there looking to use those skills to help your organization. We'll talk a little bit more about the Learning Center at the end. That is where you can find my work and some of Matt's work as well. We encourage you to check that out if you haven't visited in a while. All right, so what are we going to talk about today? We're going to really talk about what pro bono consulting is. That's an interesting term. Sometimes it gets thrown around. Skilled volunteering, skills-based volunteering. We use a lot of these terms interchangeably, but we're going to talk about what we mean when we say that. And then we're going to go through getting started, really thinking about the lessons that others have learned and how you might be able to incorporate some of those thoughts or ideas into your own projects, getting started engaging skills-based volunteers. It's getting a lot of conversation in the news. A lot of our corporations are coming to us and say that they want to do it, but unfortunately it's not as easy as that. So we'll walk through some of those steps, from getting support within your organization from paid staff people. Sometimes that can be a little bit tricky. Putting those projects together, how do you find and screen that talent, and then what do we know about managing? It's oftentimes different from how we work with our regular volunteers or our ongoing volunteers. We'll talk a little bit about working with corporations. We do sit in an interesting place between those corporations and all of you and volunteers in general. So what do we know about what they're looking for engaging their employees with your organization? And then we should have time for questions. So again, as Matt said, if you started this and found a challenge, if you have done something successfully and you want to share it, we'd love to hear from you today. So the terminology is always tough. It's sort of, it doesn't matter what you think we should call it. Lots of times the words just stick. And so skills-based volunteering, skilled volunteering, it can be a little bit counterintuitive because all volunteers have skills. Sometimes they bring those innate skills with them or their experience with them, and it's useful in the work that you're doing. But when we talk about skills-based volunteering, what we're really talking about is I like the term pro bono consultants. So just like you may have a volunteer who has experience running a back office before, maybe they did that for their career, they're coming to you and using those skills in an ongoing basis. That's not exactly what we're talking about today. What we're going to be talking about today is really those professional level skills, sort of coming in and accomplishing a project or helping you move that mission forward. So we're really talking about not providing training on how to do something or how things need to be done, but really looking to volunteers to come to us with that expertise. So traditionally, we think of that term pro bono around working with attorneys or the legal community, and that's certainly a long tradition of giving back to the community by providing no cost or low cost access to legal professionals, but we see it being applied to all kinds of professions on Volunteer Match. So you're not limited to just thinking about pro bono consultants as coming from the legal field. Some of our most popular topics, our most popular opportunities are around marketing. That's a tough one to be able to justify affording a full-time PR or marketing person in your organization, but it's a great opportunity to bring in someone with those special skills to help you get started or set up. Certainly graphic and web design, again, another really contained project that can be delegated to a pro bono consultant, or someone could come in with those skills and expertise and really guide you through that process. IT, accounting, but depending upon what you're doing and who you are as an organization, you may find that you have a need for all kinds of professionals in your field. So you're not limited to sort of these support fields or support activities. If you need, for example, if you've been with us before, you know I started my work in wildlife rehabilitation, and we had pro bono veterinarians that came and really we would be the experts on wildlife and what they needed to be able to do and what their capabilities needed to be, and then the veterinarians would provide that expertise in veterinary surgery, and really we worked together as a team. So you're definitely not limited to the topics that we see here. These are just some of the really popular ones on Volunteer Match that maybe get your mind going. All right. Maybe this is coming from the top down. Lots of times our executive directors or our board chairs read an article or talk to someone and get this idea, and they come to us and say, I've been hearing a lot about this skills-based volunteering. Are we doing that? And if not, why not? And so you sort of have to scramble and get going. And the other times you see an opportunity or you see an idea in your organization, and you need to figure out who to talk to about this idea and make sure that you're getting that support, because it really is a key component to being successful. This is hard to do on your own unless you do have a self-contained program where you can start thinking about engaging skills-based volunteers in your volunteer engagement program, maybe an HR professional or a recruiting professional, but you still want to talk about this and you really want to create this communication plan. And the first thing that you want to think about is who's invested in the way your volunteers program is being run now. So Certainly, we want to look to the leaders in our organization, depending upon what your structure is like. That could be your board, that could be your executive director, who's involved in sort of those day-to-day decisions and day-to-day leadership. You may have program managers or directors within your organization that are currently working with volunteers or who might be working with volunteers. Certainly the paid staff, field staff or line staff or just your coworkers. And you don't want to forget your volunteer staff, particularly if you're running a really big traditional program where volunteers are coming in and doing same activities or tasks week in, week out. If you start bringing in volunteers in new ways, it can feel a little bit scary or a little bit uncomfortable for them. So we want to make sure that we're thinking about who all these people are who are invested in the way the program is now, who might be interested or affected if the program changes. And then you want to start creating communication to really help get people to understand why you're doing what you're doing and what the impact of that is. And I like to think of this as this question here, if you were to pose that to your stakeholders, what could you imagine the impact of our organization, or what could you imagine your impact could be, or our program's impact could be in the community if we could expand that impact by using pro bono, engaging pro bono or skills-based volunteers? What kinds of skills are we missing? What kinds of expertise are we looking for? What do we need to get going? And really turn it into that what-if conversation, that dreaming big conversation, as opposed to some of the concerns that may exist around paid staff being replaced by volunteers, that they're training their volunteer replacement. What if people think I can't do this job by myself and a volunteer can do it? There can be a lot of attitudes in your organization that can prevent you from being successful. So you really want to start these conversations around what could we do if we weren't limited by the time and talent of paid staff, and reach out to your champions. You may find, again, if this is coming from the top down, you may have a champion in your board chair or your executive director, and that is great, and you should run with that. You may also find that you don't have that support, that this is an idea, or this is an idea you've worked with your colleagues and you think you could accomplish something or really move the mission forward in a way using some of these outside skills that you don't have on staff currently. So if you are in that situation where you're not necessarily having buy-in from your organization leadership, make sure you're reaching out to your champions. Make sure you are really thinking about who is in a good position to work with, who seems to be on the same page as I am, and what can we do to make sure that this project is successful. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but we want to make sure that we're starting off on the right foot by talking about this, building that communication, building that support, and working with those people who are on board with this idea already. And if you look around your organization and find that you might be the only person who really gets that, that's okay. As I said, this is a really great opportunity for you to model that behavior that you'd like to see in other departments or with other program managers, and think about bringing in a pro bono consultant to help you with some of the work that you're doing, maybe a recruiter or an HR professional to help you put your position descriptions into place, or train that team of volunteers who are going to screen prospective volunteers for you so that you don't have to do all those interviews yourself. So there are some opportunities or some options if you find yourself as your only champion within your organization around skills-based volunteering. All right, so we're going to talk about putting the projects together, and this is really one of the most important pieces, and I think this is where sometimes we do ourselves a disservice as volunteer managers or volunteer engagement professionals, and we don't put all these pieces in place ahead of time, particularly if it's new to our organization, particularly if our organization's been running sort of a similar program for years or decades, we forget that we need to go through and make sure we have essentially all of our ducks in a row. So as you start looking around your organization and working with your champions, I really like this idea of what could you accomplish, or how could you move your mission forward if you weren't limited by the currently available skills and the time of paid staff or the current volunteers that are working with your organization. So we want to think about a project that has measurable deliverables and outcomes, and this sometimes is harder than you think, to come up with those goals or those deliverables that are really broken down into the kinds of pieces that you need them to be broken down into. So I oftentimes use the example of redesigning a website. So if we have this idea that we want to create a new website, or our website is out of date, a measurable deliverable or outcome wouldn't be update our website. It's too big. We can't put a check mark next to it. Not everybody is on the same page with what that looks like. My idea could be really different than the executive director's idea, different from the communication director's idea. So we need to break that down into pieces. So what would need to happen before we can do this? Oftentimes, whether it's a website or a new database or whatever this big project is, even a strategic plan, sometimes the most effective first step is evaluating what you're doing now, and then moving forward with really concise, really clear steps or outcomes. So for example, when you're redesigning that website, it might be identify stakeholders within the organization to produce content, find a photographer to take new photos, identify of clients receiving services. So select 5 to 10 photos from that selection so they're really clear and that they are outlined. And if anyone else within your organization were to look at them, they would say, oh yeah, I can understand what this is, and I can understand when I'll be able to know when we get there, because this is very clear and it's a measurable deliverable or outcome, rather like 5 to 10 photos rather than new photos for our website. So one is measurable, one you can check off, and the other one is a little bit more of a variable. You also want to make sure that you're thinking about who's accountable for all of these pieces. Again, if we continue with our website, if you're engaging someone to help you design that website, they're probably not going to be the same person who is also writing the content or taking the photos, and they may not be the same person who's building the website. You need to figure out who has those skills, what are those responsibilities, who else within your organization is going to have accountabilities. It's very rare that you just turn everything over to a pro bono consultant or a skills-based volunteer and walk away and no one else needs to work on it. Oftentimes we need to figure out who's going to be the final decision maker, who gets to say which photos go up on the new website, who gets to decide how many pages we create, who's ultimately the one who's accountable for making sure that these things happen. So we want to make sure that we're including that when we put our project together. Certainly a timeline, right? Some things have to happen before other things, so we want to make sure that that's in place. We also want to set up a timeline that's realistic. When we work with professionals, they may have just a limited amount of time to share with us, so we want to make sure that everyone's on board and everyone understands we need to make these decisions quickly, and if your organization isn't ready to do that, or if you don't have the decision makers in place to get on board with this, it might not be the right time to do this. And how you'll know if it's the right time is through that evaluation piece. You absolutely have to include evaluation, and it needs to be ongoing and it needs to be regular. It can't just be after a couple of months of, hey, whatever happened with that website, maybe we should all get together on the phone, and we'll talk about that a little bit as well, really making sure that we're checking in, that we as those volunteer engagement professionals are managing those relationships. Because oftentimes if we are bringing in someone with specialized skills unless we're running that program ourselves and bringing in those HR professionals. We're going to be needing to work with other paid staff to make sure that they are working effectively and efficiently and successfully with volunteers, and that's around evaluation as well. We don't want to just leave them on their own. We want to make sure that if problems happen or if deadlines get missed, that we're on top of that quickly, and that happens through evaluation. All right, so some of you may be familiar with the Taproot Foundation. They provide grants of talent rather than grants of money, and they are in a few cities around the country where they do put together these pre-screened teams of skills-based volunteers, pro bono consultants to help organizations accomplish something really specific. But they are not everywhere. As I said, they're only in 5 cities around the country. But they have created this do-it-yourself toolkit. So it's in the slide deck, but I wanted to show it to you. This is taprootfoundation.org, Get Pro Bono, and I just wanted to show you what some of these other resources are. So if you are in a service area and you want to learn more about Taproot, I encourage you to do so. They've learned a lot of lessons by working with these corporations to bring these teams in, as well as recruiting people, just the general public, to bring their skills and experience. But they have tools to help you figure out how to put your own pro bono project together. A lot of what we've been talking about today. So here we are, and they have a little video. Oh dear, no, cancel, sorry. I'm working from home today, my computer is not exactly up to date. So here, some information, they can help you get started. They want to talk about scope, which is essentially what we've been talking about already. Those measurable deliverables and outcomes. And scope is a word that we use a lot in technology, in sort of what's going to be included in this project. All right, so I can jump in here, and this is the link that you'll have. Oops.
Hey, Jen.
Yeah.
Just an announcement. I'm tweeting out a link. If anyone wants to follow Taproot on Twitter, I'm tweeting that out now. Just search for hashtag VMLearn and you'll find my tweet.
Fabulous. Thank you. All right. There we go. They change their website around on me more often than a volunteer match changes their website around. All right, so here we can choose an area and browse through some projects. There's also a survey that you can take to help you figure out what you want to do, but we'll go through and let's continue on with our website idea. So I'm going to choose an area, and now I can scroll down, and this is sort of a project identifier, I guess, if you will, and it will help you figure out what some of those measurable deliverables and outcomes should be. So scroll through, you can see there are 17 information technology projects. If you're not sure what you're looking for, there we go. Let's go ahead and go to the end, and a website will continue on. So here is a little blurb about what it would cover, or what the project would be. So website is pretty straightforward, but maybe you're not sure what website analytics are, and you want to think maybe we need that, or some of these other projects that have a little bit more of a description. So these are the categories. You can go back up to the top and see what are those deliverables, and then is it offered by Taproot. So we're going to go ahead and say more and see more about this project. So here are those deliverables that we were talking about. Now you obviously will want to customize this and make sure that it fits with what you're thinking, but this is sort of the scope that they're talking about. So I talked about reviewing a design and style guide. We talked about measurable, right? So about 20 pages with 4 types of pages or templates, and 1 to 2 features such as a blog, or a calendar, and then a live website. So they've outlined sort of what the scope of that project is and what those deliverables are, so that if we were to read this, we would know this is about 20 pages, it's going to have a blog or a calendar. We're not going to think, oh, it's going to interact with our database and it's going to do this if it's not outlined in those deliverables. They've also, because they've done a lot of these, outlined some of the risks that come with bringing these projects on into your organization. So what are some of the things to think about before we start a project? And this is really valuable because, again, as an organization, this may not be something that you do on a regular basis, bring in skills-based volunteers or launch these consulting projects within your program. So you want to really think about what are some of those concerns or some of those things that you should think about. So what are some of the risks? This is all outlined. Again, buy-in, we've talked about that. The scope of the work is hard to keep, right? And that you can think about if we've outlined what's going on up above in these deliverables, and then the development director gets involved and says, I really want people to be able to give donations on the website. Well, if that wasn't a deliverable, that means that you're pushing out your scope. Your scope is creeping. It's getting bigger and bigger. And the bigger that scope gets and the farther we get away from our original deliverables, the less likely we are to be able to be successful. It's also risky because it can take a long time. So if you have a schedule that's longer than 6 months, you're less likely to complete it, and they know that from all the experience that they've had. So I would encourage you to play around with this tool. Again, the link is in the slides. They have some additional tools as well. So if you are in a Taproot area, you can apply for that grant through the Taproot Foundation. It also links to other organizations in other areas that may provide some of the similar type services, or you can look through your LinkedIn network to find people in your network that maybe have some of those skills or experiences. If we go back, we can see that there are some other tools as well. I'm going to go up here and jump to manage. Again, some tools to help you figure things out, to break things down, and it's a really good complement to what we're talking about today. So I'd encourage you to think about this with regard to really putting those projects together. They've done a great job of putting this all together in a way that's accessible. All right. And Matt, do we have any questions before we move on?
Nope, we've got a quiet group.
All right.
Just say keep on going. And just a reminder for those of you who joined late, we will be sending out a copy or a link to our slides on SlideShare after today's training. And again, if you'd like to ask questions, just use the go-to menu bar, click on the tab labeled questions, and I'll be here ready to answer them.
Great, thanks, Matt. All right. So certainly thinking about looking to your LinkedIn group to find that talent, but it's more than just that. And this is where we need to sort of be really selective or really picky, if you will, with who we bring in. And sometimes, particularly if this is a new idea for our organization, somebody says, oh, you know what, we should redo our website. And somebody says, oh, well, you know, the board chair's cousin's sister is, you know, a website designer. Let's bring her in. So we really want to make sure that we're not approaching finding talent in sort of that way of, well, if they're working for free, we just have to take anyone who will be able to accomplish this. And the way we do that is really making sure that we set up what the expectations are around bringing in these professionals with these amazing skills. We want to make sure that they're not just the right person skill-wise, but that they're the right person with regards to the culture of our organization. And to do that, we talked about communicating about this idea in general. We want to make sure that we're communicating about finding talent as well. Who are we looking for? Who's going to be the right person? What's the timeline? You know, what are we, you know, do we have the time and the luxury, or is it a project where we could work with someone who's just getting started, like your board chair's cousin who wants to start her own website design firm? Or is this something where we have a really tight timeline and this is the first time we've done this and we want to make sure we're successful, so we're going to bring in someone who you know, has worked with nonprofits before, or comes highly recommended, or who we've worked with before, and so what are our goals and around finding someone, and we want to make sure that we communicate about that as well, both internally and externally. So it's probably going to be a different kind of communication, but we want to make sure that the message is the same. So For example, using that idea of bringing in the right volunteer or finding someone, that we make it sound like it's a competitive process, just like it would be if we were going to pay someone. And that conversation internally may sound like, well, we want to make sure, since this is the first time we've done this, that we really, knock it out of the park and we get the right person, and we're going to look for recommendations from our peers here in our metro area about I know that the YMCA has worked with skills-based volunteer in building their website, so I'd love to talk about them talk to them about their experience, as well as sort of that external plan where we talk either to our community or to our constituents in a way that might help bring someone in, but doesn't make it sound like anyone who knocks on our door is going to be the right person. So again, taking the approach as if we would pay for this. If we were going to pay someone, if we're going to write a big check to someone to build a website, you wouldn't just put a notice up on your Facebook page and say, hey, who wants to build a website for us? Just show up at 1 o'clock tomorrow. We would have a request for that plan. We would talk to them. We would get those references. So we want to make sure that we have that plan and that we're communicating about what we're going to do both internally and externally, so that no one is surprised and no one says, well, how come my cousin didn't get this position or didn't get this opportunity? If you don't know who your volunteers are when they're not volunteering with you, I would encourage you to get to know them. Oftentimes, our volunteers have lives completely outside of the work that they do with us. Sometimes they may even be professionals in some of the things that we're looking for within our organization. A couple things to be said about that. We want to be careful that we are not asking too much of our volunteers or changing the relationship that those existing volunteers have with our organization in a way that isn't meeting their needs. So maybe you have a volunteer who's a website designer, but he really likes to come and tutor the kids after school, and he doesn't want to change that relationship, or he doesn't have the time to also build a website. But that doesn't mean that you couldn't use him as a resource and sit down and ask some questions. Mike, we have such a great relationship, and we love all the work that you've done for us. I understand that you are a website designer in your other life. We're thinking about doing a pro bono project here. I'd love to talk to you about what we should consider about those deliverables, or what kinds of skills and experiences we should be looking for when we're bringing in that right candidate, and really, using this as an opportunity to pick his brain to help you find that right person, or who within your organization might already be an expert on some of these things. So I have 2 candidates that I really like. Would you be willing to meet with them as well and sort of give me your feedback? I really trust your judgment. That kind of a relationship, even if that volunteer still just wants to come in and tutor kids after school. We don't want to change that relationship if that volunteer isn't interested in expanding what it means to be a volunteer. But don't overlook them, because you never know who might be out there ready to jump into that next level or take on the next kind of responsibility within your organization. Certainly recruiting from outside, we talked about Volunteer Match and the tools that we have to help you connect with volunteers with specific skills, and certainly the access that we have to corporations. If you have relationships with corporations already, that is a great place to start. We're going to talk about that a little bit more at the end. Colleges, if you have a college in your community, sometimes students don't have enough experience to do it all on their own, but what about working with a professor to the class work on your website as a project, or do some of that evaluation work to get you started? Don't overlook that. And if you have schools that are providing graduate programs, or students that do have to put together those portfolios where they are mentored or supervised by their professors, it can still be a really awesome experience. Get some of that enthusiasm in your organization with some of the support and experience that comes from the instructors. Also, professional groups, something to think about depending upon what kinds of skills or what kind of work you're looking for. There may be an organization dedicated specifically to those kinds of professionals. For example, if we go back to our legal field, what about your local bar association? What about the American Bar Association if you need to find a lawyer who is in your area and willing to work with you pro bono. So making sure that you're keeping those ideas in mind as well. We talked a little bit about screening candidates already. We need to make sure we know what those deliverables are. We need to also find a candidate who we trust to say, you know, I think this is a little bit ambitious, or somebody who says, well, we need to put these pieces in place before you know, asking for recommendations. So that would be part of the screening process. Again, just like you would be writing a check, you would say, this is what we're thinking about. What would be your suggestions or recommendations, or do you feel that this is accomplishable in this time frame? And if they say no, that doesn't necessarily mean they're the wrong candidate. It means that they're bringing their expertise. So we need to be able to be open, and we need to be able to trust that this person is capable of doing the job. So again, interviewing, screening, professional references, samples of work if you're looking for something that's creative like graphic design or web design, previous clients, previous pro bono clients. Don't just take that first person and going with all of what we've been talking about today. It's being able to say no. It doesn't have to be mean, but you do have to be polite and professional. Even if it's your board chair's cousin, you have to be able to have that communication plan and be able to follow through and say, you know, we really want to make sure that this, our first attempt, or that this attempt is successful, and to do that we need to make sure we bring in the right person. I'd love to have your cousin sit on the screening committee, or I'd love to go to lunch with your cousin and talk to her about what her skills and experience are. And if she's the right fit, that's great, but we really want to make sure that we're bringing in just the very best person, not just around skills, but around our culture and our time frame. So you know, there are ways to say no that don't feel mean, but we still have to be able to say no. We also need to be able to hear no. So sometimes we get really excited and we want things to happen in a certain way. We want them to happen the way we have envisioned them in our mind. And sometimes the other people that we've put into our ideas are not on the same page as we are. So we want the person who you bring in to start this project to be excited, to say yes, not to say, well, maybe, or I don't know, let me think about it. Those are no's. They just don't know how to say no to you. So as much as we as volunteer program managers sometimes struggle with saying no, everybody struggles with saying no. So we want to make sure that we can hear no even if it doesn't sound exactly like no. So we want to make sure we're listening for yes. So again, it can be tough, but really make sure, again, that you have those goals, that you know, those measurable deliverables, that you know what you're doing, you understand why we have to be as strict, I guess is the right word, as we do, to make sure that we're bringing in the right person. You don't want this to drag out over years because somebody doesn't actually have the skills or doesn't have the time to make it successful. All right, so we talked about bringing in the right person and really screening and making sure that we are putting the right people in place, and that we're not just screening for skills, we're screening for culture as well. Are they somebody you can work with? Do they seem like they get your organization? Do they care about your mission? We also want to make sure that we're putting those pieces in place. I talked about those evaluation points. I talked about making sure that we have that timeline and the accountabilities, those deliverables. If you were with us yesterday, we were talking about letters of agreement, really defining the project, really answering those. I know they refer to them as the 5 W's, even though one of them is an H, but the who, the what, the where, the when, the how. If you can answer all those questions and include those deliverables in there, so who is responsible for what, when, we talked about those timelines, the where, depending upon what kind of work you're doing, it may be that somebody's working with you at home and meeting with you on the phone, but when are they, where are they going to be meeting with you, how are they going to get it done, what are those deliverables, do they need anything from you, right, those accountabilities, those deliverables, content or access or information. If it's something that has to happen in your office, when is that going to happen? Where is it going to happen? Do they have a workstation? So making sure that you're putting all those pieces together and that you outline that into a memorandum of understanding or an agreement letter or letter of agreement. It doesn't have to be fancy, but it needs to be clear and it needs to be comprehensive. So if we were paying, this would be our contract, but we're not paying, so we have a letter of agreement or a memorandum of understanding. But it should be the same. So if you have worked with contractors before, you've hired people to do that work for you, you may have samples of those contracts around there. If you want to put that same kind of attention to detail and thoroughness into that letter of agreement. And absolutely, we talked about how important evaluation points are. Make sure you put those in the letter of agreement, that's included, that you're going to be checking in once a week on the phone, and that every other week you're going to be meeting in person with key stakeholders based on the timeline. What are those, so that they don't get overlooked, so that it doesn't start to fall apart, and then you end up with missing, not having those evaluation points built in. They have to be part of the agreement. They have to be part of the process. So I would encourage you to include those in that letter of agreement. Oftentimes, as volunteer program managers, volunteer engagement professionals, we have a hard time sort of letting go of the process. We oftentimes know our programs inside and out. We screen volunteers, we train volunteers, we can jump in and help out if volunteers don't show up. We just know all of the ins and outs. But this is going to be different, and this can oftentimes be an uncomfortable place depending upon who you are as a person, or it can be really exciting and challenging, an opportunity for professional development. What you need to do is really focus on the outcome, on those deliverables, more than the process. You are bringing in someone that hopefully you have screened well, and that there's someone who can do the job, and there's something that your organization can work with. You've defined the project. Now let go, and that's not the same as checking out, right? We want to make sure that we put those evaluation points in, those check-in points, but that we are not micromanaging this, that we're not trying to manage all of the details, so that we overlook that the outcome is the most important part, that we really need to get to this place. And if our pro bono consultant goes about it a little bit differently, as long as they're meeting those deadlines and making those evaluation check-ins, that really should be the goal here, is to make sure that those deliverables get done, not so much how they get done, as long as they are meeting those minimum requirements, right, that they're functional and that they're working. So we need to make sure that we are keeping that in mind. That we are letting go of the tasks, but that we're not letting go of that responsibility. It's still our responsibility, or whoever else in your organization has those accountabilities, to make sure that they're getting done, right? So we're not checking out. We're not walking away and hoping, fingers crossed, everything works out well. This is particularly true if you have staff who are managing these projects who have not worked with volunteers before, or have not worked with contractors before. You may need to manage that relationship a little bit more. When I have staff people who are working on projects with volunteers, I set up just a short meeting, 15, 20 minutes every week, and just my questions are really simple. Is everything going well? Does everybody have what they need? Are there any questions? Is there anything I can do to help? So again, I'm making sure that everybody's on the same page. I haven't abandoned my paid staff person with a volunteer without helping her understand how to manage that relationship, or manage that person, or manage this project. So again, making sure that we are letting things happen, but that we're not turning our back on the project or on the process. All right, and then managing expectations. That's what we've been talking about with those measurable deliverables. That's what we've been talking about with defining that project and that letter of agreement. Does everybody know what this project entails? Does everybody know when it's finished? Does everybody have the same idea of success? Like, When I say we're going to have a new website, here are the deliverables, does my development director still think that it's going to have online donations or match up with the member database? If that's not a deliverable, we need to have a conversation and make sure everybody's on the same page. And that goes for our pro bono consultants as well. How do they expect this relationship to work? Is that in line with the way you expect it to work? And if it's not, sometimes it means that that might not be the right person. So you have to have someone who understands the realities within your organization and the culture within your organization. So I'm going to make sure everybody's on the same page. All right, we're going to switch gears, but before we do, I thought I would stop and see if we had any questions. Matt?
Hey, Jen, we do have a question. I'm going to say just push ahead and we'll get to it at the end. It's a good one to end on.
Perfect. All right, so we've talked a little bit about working with corporations already, and one of the things that we know from the large corporations that we work with is that this is something that they're talking about a lot, that they really see this as an opportunity for their employees as well as an opportunity to support and work with organizations in their community. But what they tell us is that they want to have a few in-depth relationships with organizations in the community. They don't want to have 80 relationships in their community. So if you're already working with corporations with single days of service, or if you have volunteers from a corporation that are volunteering with you on an ongoing basis, that could be a really great place to start. For example, the next time that a coordinator calls you up and says, hey, we want to bring 50 people over next week on Wednesday at 1 o'clock to, repaint the break room for your clients, you can say, that's great, we would love to have you. And I would love to talk to you about bringing in someone from your HR department to help us evaluate our employee handbook. So whatever that, really work at building that two-way relationship. If you have relationships with corporations, you want to think about what kinds of skills they have in their corporation. So if you're in a major metro area and you have big offices, you've probably got a lot of activity going on. But don't overlook some of those support functions. So for example, maybe you have a branch of a bank in your community. They probably have an HR person there. They probably have an IT person there. So their primary function may be being a bank. So if you're looking for someone to help you with financial information or investing or even helping you with bookkeeping or accounting, they probably have a lot of those skills. But they may also have support functions. So don't think that you need to have an international headquarters in your community to be able to find these corporations to work with. You might also want to think about the structure of your organization and looking to something besides a large national or international corporation to get some of this support. If you're a small grassroots organization, you may want to think about working with a small business in your community. One of the things that we know is a concern is that, and lots of times in these big corporations, they just say, well, we'll just do this, and don't necessarily understand the staffing constraints or the financial constraints of just having this happen, because in their work, they are only responsible for IT or marketing or HR, as opposed to you, if you are a leader in a small organization, you may be everything. You may be the person who takes the trash out and the person who processes payroll. So you might want to think about looking to a small business person in your community. They may have a better idea of what it's like to be sort of the only captain on the boat and how to do many things at once. They have oftentimes figured out a lot of these things on their own, like marketing or figuring out financial stuff. And so you might want to look to your Chamber of Commerce or your Kiwanis clubs, organizations where business leaders are getting together, and see if there's somebody who has a connection to you or somebody that you know in the community who might be able to help you get some of these pieces going. And again, a great way to give back. Lots of times small businesses are more invested than our large corporations in our community. Want to make those relationships, want to see that support happen and help you meet your mission. And then we've talked about this, being able to really think about building that long-term relationship with with a corporation, whether they're large or small, that you are investing in that relationship and that they are thinking of you first, and you have that long-term relationship. So leadership roles as well. Committee chairs, board members as appropriate, so that it's a across the board kind of relationship with corporations. All right. So we're going to go ahead and just do a little summary. One of the things that we've talked about today is working with your champions and starting small. So you may have a really great idea, but if it doesn't seem like it's the right time in your organization, or if the right people aren't involved, maybe you need to look at a project that is smaller. Like I said before, it's a really nice idea to start with evaluating what you're doing now. A great way to get to know that pro bono consultant. It's less of a time crunch usually. It's something that can be done in just a couple of hours. We'd love to have you evaluate our website, evaluate our accounting practices, and provide some recommendations based on best practices in the field. If that seems successful and if that all works out, that's a great place to start that conversation with, well, we'd love to talk to you about putting some of these recommendations into place, and what is your expertise or availability, or are you of interest in that? And certainly, we talked about this, you might, as I said, you might have a great idea, but if the program manager isn't on board with it, start somewhere else. And it's absolutely okay to start with yourself. In fact, I oftentimes say we should be responsible for modeling the kind of volunteer engagement in our department that we would like to see in the rest of the organization. So start a pilot program in your own program, in your volunteer engagement program, and maybe make some of those mistakes where you have more control over it. Sometimes the mistakes that we make are the best learning experiences, and we'll only know if we try. With that said, if you are successful, if you do have people in your organization who are not sure about this, they don't think it's necessarily a good idea, once you start accomplishing something, once you find that champion, you start working on these projects, they will come around. It's really amazing and really powerful to see this happen, particularly if you have those communication plans in place where you're talking about this. But with that said, if it is wrong, don't just blindly push forward. If what you're learning at your check-in evaluation points, or if you've fallen off your timeline, don't force it. Don't just run towards the finish line without thinking about the things that you need to be learning along the way. So it is absolutely okay to go back and say, we messed up here, or we didn't allot for enough time here, or we didn't ask the right questions here. These deliverables are not actually realistic. That's okay. It's a great opportunity to learn and say, this is what we learned, and this is how we're going to fix it. So you want to go back to that place where things sort of went wrong and put the train back on the tracks. So don't give up. It is not easy, particularly if your organization is very set in its ways. This is about change, and we're all going to need to get on board with change, because what it means to be a volunteer is changing, and what volunteers are looking for as opportunities are changing, and some of us as organizations are a little bit behind the curve, and it can be a little scary, but don't give up. Really, if you have a vision as the volunteer engagement professional within your organization, start small, take those baby steps, work with those champions, and really make that vision a reality. All right. We're going to leave you with some resources. We have our Learning Center. You can find that at the top of the homepage. You can also get help at the top of any page on Volunteer Match. If you click on the word support at the top, you'll get to our help community. You can see questions that have been asked and answered previously. Use keywords like skilled volunteers or pro bono to see questions that have been asked specifically around these topics. We have some related webinar topics coming up. Successful volunteer interview strategies. We know that can be tough if if it's nerve-wracking for you, if you don't feel like you have those skills up to date, we'd be happy to have you join us. We'll talk about why it's important to interview and give you some tips and some sample questions. Making volunteer engagement everyone's job. Oh, we should have updated this. I've actually changed that title, so it's a similar content, a little bit changed, and it's building staff buy-in, and that's coming up in September. And we'll talk more about helping people who don't work with volunteers every day work with volunteers, so training and support and all of that. And then evolving your program for more involvement, so engaging volunteers in new ways. And I think we're doing that tomorrow. Is that right, Matt? Where do I go from here? And we'll talk about diversifying what it means to be a volunteer in your program. All right. You can find us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. We have a blog specifically for volunteer engagement professionals. If you want to see what we're talking about or what we're thinking about, you're welcome to visit us there. You're also welcome to contact me directly. I would recommend email or Twitter. I'm hardly ever at my desk. And Matt, do we have a couple of questions at the top of the hour here?
Yeah, two things. Yes, we are tomorrow doing the webinar, Where Do I Go From Here? Engage Volunteers in New Ways. So sign up for that in the Learning Center. And we got a great question from Stephen a little bit earlier in this session, who wanted to know if you had any examples, or you could point to any examples online of like an example letter of agreement or an MOU, if you knew of anything offhand that you could mention.
I don't have anything off the top of my head, but I think we may have something in the support community, and if not, we could certainly get something up in the next day or two.
Okay. So then I would say anybody who has questions of that nature, just reach out to us directly, and we can work with you one-on-one to point you in the right direction. All
right. Yeah, I know we get requests for that a lot, and it's really not something that we have a sample for, because it really needs to be created individually. And really, if you go through and answer those questions, you know, who's doing what, where, when, how, it pretty much writes itself. I think we have tips on doing that, but if they're not up there, we can certainly send them to you. All right. Any other questions?
No, we're all good. I can just say one last time. Look for that follow-up email from GoToMeeting, and we'll have a link to our SlideShare account where you can view the slides from today's session and download them if you'd like.
Great. Thanks, everyone, for joining us, and we hope to see you on a future webinar. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.